真相：地位游戏 vs 财富创造。
Truth, status games versus wealth creation.
满足感的游戏，追逐积累名望，无论是真正的名声，还是和他人的比较竞争，这种诱惑一直存在，人们总会情不自禁地被社会认同所影响。那么，怎样才能不再被这种地位游戏轻易分心呢？
Satisfaction games, the allure of accruing, whether it's fame, actual fame, or just the competition comparison trap, it's always there. There's a real draw of being swayed by social approval, but how should people learn to get less distracted by status games in that way?
我认为关键在于认识到，地位游戏并不像过去那么重要了。在早期社会，回到狩猎采集时代，当时并不存在真正意义上的财富，你只能拥有你随身能携带的东西，没有储存财富的概念，所以当时只有地位游戏。你地位越高，就能优先获得有限的资源，即使如此，你的地位也必须通过为部落做贡献来获得。
I think it just helps to see that status games don't matter as much as they used to. In old society, let's go back to hunter-gatherer times. There was no such thing as wealth, you just had what you could carry. There was no stored wealth, so wealth creation games didn't exist. All that existed was status games. If you were high status, then you got what little was available first. But even back then you had to earn your status by taking care of the tribe.
但现在情况不同了，如今我们有财富创造游戏，你可以创造产品或服务，可以通过规模化提供价值，让很多人都变得富裕。这并不是零和游戏，而是正和游戏。我可以富裕，你也可以富裕，我们甚至可以一起创造更多财富。从整体上看，我们显然比狩猎采集时代要富裕得多。因此，财富创造是一种积极向上的事。
Now we have wealth creation where you can actually create a product or a service. You can scale that product or service, and you can provide abundance for a lot of people, and that's not zero-sum, that's a positive-sum game. I can be wealthy, you can be wealthy, we can create things together. And clearly since we are all collectively far, far wealthier than we were in hunter-gatherer times, wealth creation is positive.
但地位却是有限的，地位天生就是稀缺的资源，它是排名，是等级。一旦有人上升了，必定意味着其他人下降了。当然，你也可以拓展不同种类的地位，但地位本身不像财富创造，它无法无限扩大。我们可以想象一个人都生活在星辰、月球基地或火星殖民地的未来世界，但无法想象人都拥有最高的地位。
But status is limited. There's limited status to go around. It's a ranking ladder, it's a hierarchy, and so if one person rises in status, somebody else has to lower in status. Now you can have multiple kinds of status, so you can expand some kinds of status, but it's not like wealth creation where it can go infinitely, where we can all be living in the stars and moon bases or Mars colonies.
你必须意识到，地位游戏本质上是有限的，必然充满竞争，必然涉及直接冲突，但财富创造游戏则不同，你可以只专注于创造你的产品，不需要和任何人做斗争。
Just realize the status games are inherently limited. They are always combative. They always require direct combat, whereas wealth creation games can be just you creating products. You don't have to fight anybody else.
当然，你的产品在市场中要成功，但这与直接攻击他人、嫉妒他人、感到被排挤或打压是完全不同的。财富创造的过程更令人愉悦，是震撼的，并且拥有实质性的回报。比如，你有钱就可以买更多东西。
Yes, in the marketplace your product has to succeed. But that's not quite the same as invective against other people or being angry with other people or feeling pushed down or pushed up or having a beef with somebody. So I would argue that wealth creation games are both more pleasant, they are positive sum, and they actually have concrete material returns. If you have more money you can buy more things.
你见过谁能到银行用他的地位取现的吗？
Show me where you can exchange your status at the bank.
确实如此，地位是模糊而飘忽的东西。
Exactly, it's vague and fuzzy.
但你会看到，很多人变得富有后想要追求地位，他们跑去好莱坞拍电影，去戛纳、达沃斯，或向非营利组织大笔捐款， 试图用钱换取地位。
Now, you see people get rich, they have money. What do they want? They want status. So they go to Hollywood, start starring in movies, they donate to non-profits, they go to Cannes or Davos, and they start trying to trade the money for status.
人总是渴望他们没有的东西。从进化的角度看，我们天生对地位有强烈渴求，因为如我所说，财富的创造直到农业革命出现之后才真正开始兴起。有了谷物储藏，工业革命则将其带到一个更高的层次，而现在的信息时代又进一步扩大了这种可能性。
People always want what they don't have, and we are evolutionarily hardwired for status because, as I said, wealth creation didn't really exist until the agricultural revolution when you could store grain. Then the Industrial Revolution took it to another level, and now the information age is taking it to yet another level.
历史上从未有过像现在这样容易赚钱的时代，当然，赚钱依旧很难，但创造财富的机会却前所未有的丰富。如今你可以运用各种杠杆，有大量机会可供发掘。当然，财富不会凭空掉到你怀里，你仍然需要去学习一些东西，拥有一定知识，做一些真正有意思的事情。但如今实现财富自由的机会比过去多得多了。几百年前你出生是农奴，你死的时候依旧是农奴，几乎没有机会翻身。
There's never been an easier time to make money. Yes, it's still hard, but there's never been an easier time to create wealth, because there's so much leverage out there. There's so much opportunity. You still have to go find it. It's not easy, it's not going to fall on your lap, and you have to learn something and know something and do something interesting. But nevertheless it's possible to many more people. A few hundred years ago you were born a serf. You were going to die a serf. There was almost no way out of that.
这一切已经彻底改变了，因此我会建议你，比起关注地位游戏，更应该关注财富创造游戏。比如，如果你试图通过增加社交媒体的关注量和名气来赚钱，那会远比你先通过财富创造赚钱，然后再用这些财富获得名气困难得多。
That's changed. And so I would argue that you're better off focusing on wealth games than status games. If you're trying to build up, for example, you're following on a social network and get famous and then get rich off of being famous. That's a much harder path than getting rich first and then going for your fame afterwards would be my advice.
正如你所说，很多人却在反其道而行之，这很有趣。有些人明明已经拥有了巨额财富，我们称为超脱金钱 fuck you money 或财富自由，他们为什么还要反过来追逐地位呢？一般人都是追求地位，目的是希望最终将其兑换成财富，而这些已经拥有绝财富的人又为何如此？
A lot of people do that. As you said, it's funny how people who have achieved such a level of wealth, you think, why do you need the status? Given that most people use status to then try and cash in to achieve wealth, if you've achieved fuck you money already, if you're post money or asset heavy as it's known, why are you trying to go in the other direction?
就如你所说，我们在生物进化上天生就渴望地位，相比之下，财富则是一种新颖的概念，需要你用更多理性的思考才能理解。是的，财富当然也有物质成分，比如更多的食物，更好的生存条件，但想要真正理解财富的影响力和局限性，以及其优势与劣势，都需要更多的动用你的新皮质，理性思考。
As you said, because we've got an illustrious history biologically of wanting status, and wealth is kind of novel. It's new. Wealth is something that you have to understand more intellectually. Yeah. There's a physical component. More food, more survival. But to truly understand the effects and the powers and the abilities and limitations, and the advantages and disadvantages of wealth, you have to use your neocortex a lot more.
这是否意味着玩这些游戏的真正目的是为了最终赢得游戏并摆脱游戏？地位游戏是否比财富游戏更难赢了就走呢？
Does that mean the reason to play the game is to win the game and be done with it? Is it harder to win and to be done with for status than it is for wealth?
这是个很棒的观察，我之前还没想过，但你说的没错。我觉得人们对地位的渴望很难满足，但财富达到一定程度之后， 人们通常是可以感到满足的。
That's a good observation. I hadn't thought that through. But you're right. I think people will always want more status. But I think you can be satisfied at a certain level of wealth.
确实如此，但人总会有种感觉，排行榜永远在那儿，刺激着人们。
Well, you always have this sort of sense, and this is what leaderboards are.
对，这就是零汉游戏，
That's right, and it is zero-sum.
就像福布斯全球富豪榜那样。
And it is, I guess, you know, the Forbes richest people on the planet.
没错，这种地位的阶梯更难攀爬，但以 iTunes 和 YouTube 为例，他们每天都让你和同领域的人竞争，让你关注你的点赞数、评论数和订阅量。
Yeah, that one's harder to climb the ladder on. But the fact that, for example, iTunes and YouTube can put you in competition against your contemporaries every single day, and make you go up and down and show you likes and comments and ratings subscribers.
你今天排名又提升了多少？这种机制让你永远在跑步机上追逐不停。
It's how much you're up. Exactly. They keep you running on that treadmill forever.
喜剧演员吉米·卡尔曾经说过一句很棒的话：轨迹比位置更重要。比如，你如果现在排名世界第101位，但去年排名第200位，你会感到巨大的进步；而你如果现在排名第2位，但去年排名第1位，你会强烈感受到下降带来的不安。
Jimmy Carr has this cool idea where he says trajectory is more important than position. So, if you are number 101 in the world, but last year you were number 200 versus your number 2 in the world, but last year you were number 1, there is this sense of the deceleration is very, very tangible.
没错，这种心理还是回到进化本能。如果某个东西正在流失，除非你及时止损，否则你最终会一无所有。这是我们的天性，因为在人类进化过程中，我们一直处于生存的边缘，我们本能的不想失去已经拥有的一切。
And again it goes back to evolution. Something that is bleeding eventually dies, unless you stop the bleeding, so you're hardwired not to lose what you have. Because we evolved in conditions where we're so close to just not surviving. You don't want to give anything up. It's hardwired into us to not give anything up.
于是你就死死地攥紧它。
So you grip tightly?
对，就是这样。
That's right.
真相，自尊的重要性。
Truth, the importance of self-esteem.
你曾经说过，这个世界上最糟糕的境况就是缺乏自尊。为什么？
The worst outcome in the world is not having self-esteem. Why?
这确实是个棘手的问题。我见过那些不喜欢自己的人，这是最艰难的处境，因为他们每天都在和自己内心搏斗，面对外部世界已经足够困难，而世界上永远不会有人比你自己更爱你自己。如果连你自己都在挣扎和内耗，外面的世界就会变成一道无法跨越的难关。
It's a tough one. I look at the people who don't like themselves and that's the Taoist slot because they are always wrestling with themselves. It's hard enough to face the outside world, and no one's going to like you more than you like yourself. So if you're struggling with yourself, then the outside world becomes an insurmountable challenge.
人们为什么会缺乏自尊呢？很难给出一个准确的答案，可能是基因造成的，也可能是环境因素所致。我觉得很多时候是因为他们童年时期没有得到无条件的爱，而这种缺失深入骨髓。但无论什么原因，自尊的缺乏绝对是一个巨大的限制因素。
It's hard to say why people have low self-esteem. It might be genetic. It might just be circumstantial. A lot of times I think it's because they just weren't unconditionally loved as a child and that sort of seeps in at a deep core level. But self-esteem issues can be the most limiting.
有一个很有趣的观点，在某种程度上，自尊就是你与自己之间的声誉。你随时都在观察自己，你知道自己在做些什么，你也有自己的一套道德准则。每个人的道德准则各不相同，但如果你无法遵守自己的准则，尤其是你要求别人也遵守的那个标准，你的自尊就会受到损害。因此，或许提升自尊的一种有效方法，就是严格的遵守自己的道德标准，设定一个清晰的原则，并认真地去践行它。
One interesting thought is that to some extent self-esteem is a reputation you have with yourself. You're watching yourself at all times. You know what you're doing and you have your own moral code. Everyone has a different moral code. But if you don't live up to your own moral code, the same code that you hold others to, it will damage your self-esteem. So perhaps one way to build up your self-esteem is to live up to your own code. Very rigorously have one and then live up to it.
另一个提升自尊的方法，可能是为他人做一些事情。回想我自己的人生，那些真正让我感到自豪的时刻，其实非常罕见，而且往往并非你想象的那些，比如获得的物质成功，或者学到了什么特殊技能。那些让我真正感到自豪的，恰恰是我为自己所爱的人或是做出牺牲的时刻。很讽刺，但事实就是这样。
Another way to raise your self-esteem might be to do things for others. If I look back on my life, and what are the moments that I'm actually proud of, they are very far and few between. It's not that often, and it's not the things you would expect. It's not the material success. It's not having learned this thing or that. It's when I made a sacrifice for somebody or something that I loved. That's when I'm actually, ironically, most proud.
虽然这是通过一种显性的心理练习得出的结论，但我相信在潜意识层面上，我也在记录着这些感受。这告诉我，即便我并未被别人所爱，创造爱的途径就是给予爱，通过奉献与责任来表达爱。因此，我认为这样的行动能够迅速提高你的自尊。
Now that's through an explicit mental exercise. But I'll bet you at some level I'm recording that implicitly. So that tells me that even if I am not being loved, the way to create love is to give love, to express love through sacrifice and through duty. And so I think doing things like that can build up your self-esteem really fast.
你提到牺牲这一点很有趣，很多人常说，我为了我的工作做出了巨大的牺牲，其实这更多的是拿你不太想要的东西，去换取你更想要的东西，而不是真正意义上的牺牲或付出代价。
It's interesting when you talk about sacrifice, because a lot of the time people say, I sacrificed so much for my job. It's like, yeah, but that was you sacrificing something that you wanted less for something that you wanted more, as opposed to genuinely taking some sort of cost.
真相，正直的代价。
Truth, the price of integrity.
如果自尊意味着你的行动与内在价值观保持一致，特别是在困难的时候，我很好奇，那些更具有自省精神、更讲究诚信的人，是否要付出更多的代价？毕竟他们肩负着更沉重的内心成本。
And, yeah, I wonder whether if self-esteem is you adhering to your internal values, your actions aligning with your values, even when it's difficult or perhaps even more so when it's difficult. I wonder whether there is a price that people who are more introspective, high integrity pay, because they think, well, you've got this heavier set of overheads that you need to pay in some way.
是啊，如果讲道德能轻松赚钱，那人人都会去做，所以道德在某种程度上必然意味着牺牲，但这种牺牲你也可以理解为是放弃短期利益，以换取长期利益。举个例子，美德其实就是一套信念，如果社会上的每个人都去遵守这些美德，最终结果就是实现所有人的双赢。
Well, being ethical were profitable, everybody would do it, right? So, at some level it does involve a sacrifice. But that sacrifice can also be thought of as your thinking for the long term rather than the short term. For example, virtues are a set of beliefs that if everybody in society followed them as individuals, it would lead to win-win outcomes for everybody.
如果我诚实，你也诚实，我们之间就能更顺畅的合作，更轻松的互动，因为我们彼此信任，即便社会上偶尔有些骗子，只要骗子不占多数，一个高信任度的社会总体来说会更繁荣。我认为大部分美德都是类似的道理。
So if I am honest and you are honest, then we can do business more easily. We can interact more easily because we can trust each other. Even though there might be a few liars in the system, as long as there aren't too many liars and too many cheaters, a high trust society where everybody's honest is better off. And I think a lot of the virtues work this way.
比如，我不去勾引你的妻子，你也不去勾引我的，我不会抢走桌子上的所有食物。遵守这些规则，我们才能更好的相处，创造双赢的局面。
If I don't go around sleeping with your wife, and you don't sleep with mine, and if I don't take all the food that's at the table first and so on, then we all get along better and we can play win-win games.
真相：博弈论与社会。
Truth, game theory and society.
博弈论里最著名的游戏是囚徒困境，但囚徒困境描述的是一个充满背叛和欺骗的环境，在那个情形下，稳定的那神均衡就是所有人都互相欺骗，唯一能实现双赢的囚徒困境，就是长期重复的博弈。但现实社会中，更普遍的其实是猎鹿博弈。
In game theory, the most famous game is Prisoner's Dilemma. But that's all about everybody cheating and the Nash equilibrium, the stable equilibrium there is everybody cheats. The only way you can play a win-win game is if you have long-term iterated moves. But that's not actually the most common game played in society.
在猎鹿博弈中，如果我们合作，就能猎到一头大鹿，每个人都有丰盛的晚餐。但如果我们不合作，每个人只能独自猎兔，只能获得少量食物。
The most common game played is one called a stag hunt, where if we cooperate we can bring down a big stag and both have big dinners. But if we don't cooperate then we have to go hunt like rabbits and we each have small dinners.
这个游戏存在两个稳定均衡，一个是所有人都选择猎兔子，各自温饱；另一个是大家齐心协力猎鹿，共同富足。因此，一个高信任度的社会，其实就是一个更有美德的社会。在这样的社会里，我能放心的与你合作去猎鹿，信任你会准时到场，认真工作，并公平分配收益。
That game has two stable equilibriums. One could be where we're both hunting the rabbit, and one could be where we're hunting the stag. So the high trust society is a more virtuous society where I can trust you to come hunt the stag with me and show up on time and do the work and divide it up properly.
因此，我们渴望生活在一个所有人都有各自的美德，并认真践行这些美德的社会里，那样我们都将受益。但我要强调的是，这种美德的践行并非必须为别人而牺牲，你完全可以为了自己去践行这些美德，这会提升你的自尊，也会吸引更多有美德的人靠近你。
So you want to live in a system where everybody has their own set of virtues and follows them, and then we all win. But I would argue you don't need to do that for sacrifice. You don't need to do that for other people. You can do it just purely for yourself. You will have higher self-esteem. You will attract other high-virtue people.
我是否愿意跟自己这样的人去猎鹿？
Would I go on a stag hunt with me?
对，就是这个意思。如果你是一个长期践行道德与美德的人，你就会吸引其他同样诚心而有美德的人。但如果你是一条鲨鱼，迟早你会发现自己身边只有其他鲨鱼，那样的生活绝对不会好过。
Correct. Yeah. That's right. If you're the kind of person who long-term signals ethics and virtues, then you'll attract other people who are ethical and virtuous, whereas if you are a shark, you will eventually find yourself swimming entirely amongst sharks and that's an unpleasant existence.
这也类似著名的棉花糖实验，虽然最近这个实验的结论受到了质疑和复制危机的冲击，但它的核心依然成立：牺牲短期利益换取长期利益。事实上，很多所谓的美德，本质上都是长期的、自私的理性选择。
This goes back to the equivalent of the marshmallow test. The marshmallow test does not replicate. It got hit hard in the replication crisis recently, but it is about trading off the short term for the long term. I think for a lot of these so-called virtues, there are long-term selfish reasons to be virtuous.
真相、自我怀疑与自信。
Truth, self-doubt, and confidence.
过去你会经历自我怀疑吗？这是你曾经必须跨越的障碍吗？
Yeah. Did you deal with self-doubt in the past? Is that something that was a hurdle for you to overcome?
算是，也不完全是吧。我过去经历的自我怀疑更多是，天啊，我还不知道该怎么做。我需要弄清楚这些，而不是那种别人肯定比我更了解我该做什么，或者我真是个笨蛋，我不配拥有这些的那种自我怀疑。
Yes and no. I think I dealt with self-doubt in the sense that, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and I need to figure it out. But I didn't doubt myself in the way of somebody else knows better than me for me, or that I'm an idiot or I'm not worthwhile.
可能我成长过程中的优势在于，我身边的人给了我足够多的爱， 那种无条件的爱，这让我拥有了许多自信。这种自信并不是说我拥有所有问题的答案，而是一种深层次的确性，知道我一定能想办法搞定，也相信我知道自己真正想要什么，知道只有我才最清楚自己的需求。
I guess I had the benefit that I grew up with a lot of love. The people around me loved me unconditionally, and so that just gave me a lot of confidence. Not the kind of confidence that would say I have the answer, but the kind of confidence that I will figure it out and I know what I want, or only I am a good arbiter of what I want.
对，这种自我信念让你可以明确判断哪些东西对我真正重要，对我的自尊真正有价值，我是否应该追求这个目标，我能够对这个问题做出自己的公正判断，而不会轻易受到外界的干扰。你刚刚讲了一个很好的点，就是即便我们自己以为并没有主动记录下这些经历，某个层面，我们的大脑深处也正在悄悄记录着这一切。古希腊人称之为守护神 demon， 对吗？
Yeah. That level of self-belief, I suppose, allows you to determine what is it that matters to me, my self-esteem. Should I chase this thing or not? I can make a fair judgment on that as opposed to being so swayed. It's such a good point about even if you think you're not consciously logging the stuff that you're doing, there is some part that's in the back of your mind. Was it the demon? Is that what the ancient Greeks or something used to talk about?
对，在计算机科学领域也有一个类似的概念 ，daemon， 守护进程，它是在后台默默运行的程序，你看不到它，却在持续发挥作用。这一术语或许的确源自古希腊的守护神 demon 概念。
Yeah, in computer science, there's a concept of a daemon, which is a program that's always running in the background. You can't see it, but yeah, it probably comes from the ancient Greek daemon.
你所知道但却不知道自己知道的东西，远远多于那些你能清楚说出自己知道的东西。你甚至无法表达出自己掌握的绝大多数知识。有些感觉是无法用语言表达的，有些念头深藏于身体之内或潜意识里，从未明确表达过。
What you know that you don't even know you know is far greater than what you know you know. You can't even articulate most of the things you know. There are feelings you have that have no words for them. There are thoughts you have that are felt within the body or subconsciously that you never articulate to yourself.
就像语言的语法规则，你也无法完整的说明出来，但你在说话时却能毫不费力地运用它们。因此我认为，你的隐性知识，也就是那些你甚至意识不到自己拥有的知识，远远超过了你能明确表达和沟通的显性知识。
You can't articulate the rules of grammar, yet you exercise them effortlessly when you speak. So I would argue that your implicit knowledge, and your knowledge that is unknown to yourself, is far greater than the knowledge you can articulate and that you can communicate.
某个层面上，你总是在观察自己，这也正是意识的本质。意识就是那个在观看你的一切，你的思想甚至你的身体的旁观者。所以，如果你想拥有高自尊，那就努力赢得自己对自己的尊重吧。
At some level you're always watching yourself. That's what your consciousness is, right? It's the thing that's watching everything, your mind, including your body. So if you want to have high self-esteem, then earn your own self-respect.
我有个理念，叫内在的黄金法则。传统的黄金法则告诉我们，你希望别人如何对待你，你就要如何对待别人。而我的内在黄金法则则是，你要像别人本该善待你那样善待你自己。这尤其适用于那些成长过程中并未获得无条件爱的人。
I have this idea, the internal golden rule. So the golden rule says treat others the way that you want to be treated. The internal golden rule says treat yourself like others should have treated you. And it was a repost to maybe people that didn't grow up with unconditional love.
真相，爱的本质。
Truth, the nature of love.
说到爱的这个话题，
Yeah, on the love thing.
关于爱，有一点非常有意思。你可以尝试去回忆一下被爱的感觉，回忆一下曾经有人爱着你时的状态，真正的去体会并试着在内心重新创造这种感觉。
One of the interesting things about love is you can try to remember the feeling of being loved. So go back to when someone was in love with you or someone did love you, and really remember that feeling, like really sit with it and try to recreate it within yourself.
接着，再想想你去爱别人的感受， 当你主动去爱另一个人时的体验，我这里甚至不一定指浪漫的爱情，要稍微谨慎一点，更可能是兄弟姐妹、孩子、父母之类的爱。回忆一下，当你对某个人或某件事产生深厚感情时的状态。那么问题来了，这两种感受究竟哪一种更好？
Then go to the feeling of you loving someone and when you were in love. I'm not even talking about romantic love necessarily, so be a little careful there. I'm talking more about love for a sibling or a child or something like that, or a parent. Think about when you felt love towards someone or something. And now which is better?
我认为主动去爱他人的感觉，实际上比被爱的感觉更为美妙。被爱多少有一点腻味，有点过于甜蜜，甚至会让你想稍微推开对方。有时候被人爱得太热烈了，你会觉得有些尴尬，甚至会觉得受到了一种束缚。
I would argue that the feeling of being in love is actually more exhilarating than the feeling of being loved. Being loved is a little cloying. It's a little too sweet. You kind of want to push the person away. It's a little embarrassing. And you know that if that person is too much into it that you feel constrained.
而主动去爱的感觉则完全不同，它让你内心更加开阔，更加敞亮，甚至激励你去成为更好的自己，促使你不断成长。因此，你随时可以创造爱的感觉，而问题往往出在对他人爱的渴求上。
On the other hand, the feeling of being in love is very expansive. It's very open. It actually makes you a better version of yourself. It makes you want to be a better person. So you can create love anytime you want. It's just that craving to receive it that's the problem.
真相，骄傲的代价。
Truth, the cost of pride.
你曾经说过，最昂贵的人格特质是骄傲，这是为什么？
The most expensive trait is pride. How come?
对，这是我最近发的一条推特。我之所以这么说，是因为我发现骄傲是学习的最大敌人。当我观察我身边的朋友和同事时，那些固步自封、不肯成长的人，往往是那些最骄傲的人，因为他们觉得自己早就掌握了答案，于是不愿意公开地承认错误，去修正自己。
Oh, that was a recent one. I tweeted that just because I think that pride is the enemy of learning. When I look at my friends and colleagues, the ones who are still stuck in the past and have grown the least are the ones who were the proudest because they sort of feel like they already had the answers and so they don't want to correct themselves publicly.
这其实跟之前我们谈的名声那个话题有点类似，你公开宣称过某些观点，正是这些观点让你出名，让你被大家所认识，但当你想要转变或者调整时，你的骄傲阻止了你承认，其实我错了。
This goes back to the fame conversation. You get locked into something you said. It made you famous. You're known for that and now you want to pivot or change. So pride prevents you from saying I'm wrong.
在这里，骄傲具体指什么呢？
What's pride in this context here?
骄傲可能很简单，比如你炒股票，交易失败了，你却拒绝承认自己的判断有误，于是你死死抱住一笔糟糕的交易。也可能是你决定跟某个人结婚，或搬到某个城市，或进入某个行业，最终你发现这是个错误的决定，却因为骄傲而无法承认，于是就陷在其中，难以自拔。
It could be as simple as you're trading stocks and then you don't admit you were wrong, so you hang on to a lousy trade. It could be that you made a decision to marry someone or move somewhere or enter a profession. It doesn't work out, and then you don't admit that you were wrong, so you get stuck in it.
更准确来说，骄傲使你困在了举步最优中，你不愿意下山重新攀登更高的山峰。这就是为什么我说它是最昂贵的特质，因为它迫使你不断地在不同的领域付出代价。
It's mostly about getting trapped in local maxima, as opposed to going back down and climbing up the mountain again. And that's why it's an expensive trait, because you continue to need to repay it in one form or another.
是啊，你被困在了一个次优点，它会让你损失金钱，损失成功。
Yeah. You're just stuck at a suboptimal point. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you success.
更重要的是，它让你损失了宝贵的时间。
And time.
没错，最宝贵的就是时间。
And time.
真相，重新开始的勇气。
Truth, the willingness to start over.
伟大的艺术家总是拥有重新开始的勇气，无论是保罗、西蒙、麦当娜还是 U 乐队。我知道这样说可能有点暴露年龄了， 笑，但伟大的企业家们也是如此，他们总愿意一次次的从头再来。
The great artists always have this ability to start over, whether it's Paul Simon or Madonna or YouTube. I'm dating myself a little bit, but even the great entrepreneurs, they are just always willing to start over.
我总会想起埃隆·马斯克的故事，他最初创建了 X.com， 后来与另一家公司合并为
PayPal. I'm always struck by the Elon Musk story, where he did PayPal as X.com originally, actually, was his financial institution that got merged into PayPal.
能拿到这个域名也是挺好的。笑，
Well, it's good that you've got the domain. You know what I mean.
对，他还一直留着这个域名，并且继续使用。他说过类似这样的话：我卖掉 PayPal 赚了2亿美元，把1亿投进了 SpaceX，8000万投进了特斯拉，2000万投进了 SolarCity， 最后还不得不借钱付房租。
Yeah, exactly. I'll park that. I'll hold on to it. He's been using it for quite a while, and he said something like along the lines of, I made $200 million from the sale of PayPal. I put $100 million into SpaceX, $80 million in Tesla, $20 million in SolarCity, and I had to borrow money for rent.
他就是这样一个愿意不断投入的人，他不在乎别人怎么看待他的成功或失败，他愿意把所有一切再次押上。
This guy is a perennial taker. He's always willing to start over. He doesn't have any pride about being seen as successful or being seen as a failure. He's willing to put it all in.
每一次都坚定地支持自己。
Back himself again each time.
没错，但最关键的是，他始终愿意重新开始，即使到了现在，他甚至将整个美国当成了一个初创公司，用修复初创公司的方式去修复它。
Back himself again each time, but the key thing is he's always willing to start over. Even now, when he's sort of made his new startup as USA, he's basically trying to fix it like he would fix one of his startups.
这背后是一种勇于看起来像个傻瓜的勇气，也是一种愿意重新开始的决心。但很多人做不到，一旦他们获得了成功、金钱、名声，就再也回不去了。他们不愿意重新回到零点，但要创造任何伟大的东西，你就必须从0到1，这意味着你必须回到0，而这过程非常痛苦和艰难。
I think that is a willingness to look like a fool, and that is a willingness to start over. And a lot of people just don't have that. They become successful, they become rich, they become famous, and that's it, they're stuck. They don't want to go back to zero, and creating anything great requires 0 to 1, and that means you go back to 0, and that's really painful and hard to do.
真相，选择幸福。
Truth, choosing happiness.
说到承担风险，我最近一直在想你曾说的一句话：任何时刻，如果你过得并不开心，你也没在为任何人做贡献。很多人习惯于默默承受痛苦，习惯于降低对生活质量的期待。
Talking about risk, something I've been thinking about a lot to do with you. Any moment when you're not having a good time, when you're not really happy, you're not doing anyone any favors. I think lots of people have become unusually familiar with suffering silently in that sort of a way of not having a high bar for your expectation for quality of life.
对啊，很多人都在给自己制造痛苦，因为他们以为痛苦是光荣的，或者认为经历痛苦会让他们成为更好的人。我以前常开玩笑说，如果你真那么聪明，怎么不去想办法让自己开心点呢？
Yeah, a lot of it is just you're memeing yourself into a bad outcome because you think that somehow suffering is glorious, or that it makes you a better person. My old quip was, if you're so smart, why aren't you happy? Why can't you figure that one out?
事实上，你完全可以又聪明又幸福。历史上很多聪明人也是幸福的，关键就在于你得明确告诉自己，是的，我要选择幸福。
The reality is you can be smart and happy. There are plenty of people in human history who are smart and happy, and I think it just starts with saying, yay, you know what? I'm going to be happy.
很多年前，我在泰国遇到一个曾为托尼·罗宾斯工作的人，他的心态特别棒。他说，有一天我意识到，这个世界上一定存在一个最幸福的人，既然总有人得承担这个世界最幸福的人的头衔， 那为什么不能是我呢？我来承担这份责任，我就要成为那个人。我听完就觉得，哇，这个思维方式真不错，他懂得如何重新定义事情。
There was a guy that I met in Thailand a long time ago, and he used to work for Tony Robbins. He had a great attitude, and we were sitting around, and he said, I realized one day that someone out there had to be the happiest person in the world. Like that person just has to exist. He said, why not me? I'll take on that burden. I'll be that guy. I heard that and I thought, wow, that's pretty good. That's a good frame. But he knew how to reframe things.
我认为幸福很多时候是一种主动的选择。首先你得告诉自己，没错，我要成为一个幸福的人，我会搞清楚如何实现它，你自然就会在过程中逐渐摸索出方法。
I think a lot of happiness is just a choice in the sense that you make. First you just identify yourself as actually I'm going to be a person that's going to be happy. I'm going to figure it out. And you just figure it out along the way.
你不会因此而丧失自己的抱负或对成功的渴望。很多人害怕，如果我变得幸福了，我就不会再想要成功了。实际上并非如此，你只是会去做那些更符合幸福的你的事情，并且在这些事情上取得成功。相信我，那个幸福的你绝不会回头看那个不快乐的你，说：“哦，那个家伙本来会更成功，我真希望我是他。”毕竟，你追求成功的根本原因就是为了获得幸福。
You're not going to lose your other predilections. You're not going to lose your ambition or desire for success. I think a lot of people have this fear that, oh, if I'm happy, then I won't want to be successful. No. You'll just want to do things that are more aligned with the happy version of you, and you'll be successful at those things. Believe me, the happy version of you is not going to look back at the unhappy version and say, oh man, that guy was going to be more successful. I wish I was him. You're actually trying to be successful so you'll be happy.
没错，这正是我要说的一个重要观点。我们经常为了一个终极目标，牺牲我们真正想要的东西，比如我们牺牲幸福去追求成功，只是希望当我们足够成功后再去获得幸福，就像一道方程式，你在两边同时减去成功这个变量，最后才发现其实幸福和成功并非矛盾。至少在我自己的人生经历中，我并没有发现二者存在取舍。相反，我发现越是幸福，我越愿意去做我擅长且真正热爱的事，结果反而让我更加成功，而不是更少。
That's the whole point. You've gotten it backwards. You unlocked one of my trap cards. One of my favorite insights is that we sacrifice the thing we want for the thing that's supposed to get it. So we sacrifice happiness in order to be successful, so that when we're finally sufficiently successful, we can actually be happy. And if you have some sort of simultaneous equation, and you just sort of stripped success off from both sides, yeah, at least in my own life, I have not found there to be a trade-off. If anything, I have found that the happier I get, the more I am going to do the things that I'm good at and aligned with, and that will make me even happier. And so I actually end up more successful, not less.
真相，自我优先的自由。
Truth, the freedom of self-prioritization.
从和你相处的这段时间看，我觉得你身上有一种非常独特的、全面的自私。你非常坦然地把自己放在首位，即使说出或做出的事情可能会让别人觉得有些尴尬或不自在，可以说，你毫无歉意地优先考虑自己。
I would say from the bit of time that we'd spent together, you have a really interesting trait of holistic selfishness. You're sort of prepared to put yourself first. You seem largely unfazed by saying or doing things that might result in other people feeling a little bit awkward if it's truthful for you. It's like unapologetically self-prioritizing, I guess.
我认为每个人其实都是这样，只不过毫无歉意这一点相对比较少见罢了。但人性本来就是把自己放在首位的。你作为独立个体，活下来就是最重要的。
Yeah, I think everybody is. Maybe unapologetic is the part that's relatively rare. But I think everybody puts themselves first. That's just human nature. You're here because you survive. You're a separate organism.
这很有趣，但我不完全同意你的看法。大多数人都在试图表现自己的无私，比如经常有人虚伪地说：“当然了， 我很乐意去你的婚礼，而内心真正想法是，天啊，我根本不想参加这场婚礼。
Interesting. I'm maybe, but I know we like to virtue signal and pretend we're doing it for each other. How many times does somebody say, yay, of course, I'd love to come to the wedding? They're like, I don't want to be at the fucking wedding.
我从来不参加婚礼。
I don't go to weddings.
没错，这就是我的意思。我觉得很多人并不会真正把自己放在首位，反而是为了迎合眼前的社会关系而妥协自己的需求。
But this is my point, right? So I don't think you're necessarily right with that. I think that people don't put themselves first. I sometimes think that they compromise what it is that they want in order to appease socially what's in front of them.
我越来越果断地这样做了，主要是我看到了或听到了别人实现自由的方式，这让我更加解放。比如，我看了马克·安德森 （Mark Andreessen） 写的一篇博文，他建议不要使用日程表，于是我删掉了我的日历，尝试完全用记忆来管理时间。如果我记不住某件事，那说明它不值得占用我的精力。在我看来，所有这样做的人都是在浪费自己的时间。你不想做的事就不要去做。生命如此短暂，一辈子只有4000个星期左右。虽然大家都听过类似的话，但却很少真正牢记在心。但我对生命的有限性感受得非常清晰。我不会浪费时间。
I just view it as everyone's wasting their time on it. Don't do something you don't want to do. Why are you wasting your time? There's so little time on this earth. Life goes fast. What is it? 4,000 weeks, that's your lifespan? And yes, we hear that, but we don't remember it. But I guess I'm keenly aware of how little time I have, so I'm just not going to waste it.
你是如何逐渐习惯于这样坦然地把自己放在第一位的？
How have you got more comfortable at being the unapologetic self-prioritizer?
我在这方面变得越来越彻底，主要是因为我看到或听到别人的自由，这也进一步让我解放。
I've gotten utterly more and more ruthless on it. Mainly it's that I see or hear people's freedom, and then that liberates me further.
我读到 Mark Andreessen 网名 Marka 的一篇部落格文章，他说不要排时间表，我就把这话记在心里，所以我删掉了我的行事历，不再使用任何排程，我尽量把事情记在脑子里。如果记不住，那就代表不值得加进来。
So I read a blog post by P. Marka, aka Mark Andreessen, where he said don't keep a schedule, and I took that to heart. So I deleted my calendar and I don't keep a schedule. I try to remember it all in my head. If I can't remember it, I'm not going to add it.
我很高兴你能掌握自己的时间。
I'm glad you got your own time.
对，没错，我常常要到最后一刻才去查东西，但讽刺的是，我甚至不知道 Mark 自己有没有真的做到，但他的观点是对的。
Yeah, exactly. I had to look things up at the last minute, but ironically, don't even know if Mark himself follows that. But he made the correct point.
我读到一个小故事，说 Jack Dorsey 用 iPhone 和 iPad 处理所有业务，甚至不用 Mac。我就想，好，我也要试试。所以我主要透过简讯来运作，然后设了一个冷酷的电子邮件自动回复。
I read a little story about Jack Dorsey doing all his business off his iPhone and iPad and not even going into a Mac, and I said, okay, I want to do that. So I'm going operate through text messaging and I put up my nasty email.
这样让你觉得更自由吗？
Does that feel like more freedom?
没错，因为我总是在行动中，所以我设了一个冷酷的邮件自动回复，上面写着：我不看邮件，也别转简讯给我，对吧？如果你真的需要找到我，你自然会找到办法。
It does, yeah. Because you're on the go. So I have a nasty email autoresponder that says I don't check email and don't text me either, right? If you need to find me, you'll find me.
显然，这其中有些是成功后的奢侈，但其实有些习惯我很早之前就养成了，比如这种强硬的邮件自动回复，早就用了很久。
Obviously, some of this is a luxury of success, but some of these habits I adopted long before actually. The hostile email autoresponder started a long time ago.
我以前还注册过一个网域，叫做 donthecoffee.com， 我会用这个邮箱回复别人， 好让他们明白意思。但后来我不再那么无理了，现在我只会选择消失，直接不回复。
I used to own the domain. I let it go. dontocafe.com. I used to reply from that email just so people would get the point. But I stopped being rude about it. Now I just ghost. I just disappear.
我太太知道绝对不要替我预约或排任何活动，我不需要去参加夫妻聚餐，不需要去参加生日，不需要去参加婚礼。
My wife knows not to ever book or schedule me for anything. I'm not expected to go to couples dinners. I'm not expected to go to birthdays. I'm not expected to go to weddings.
如果有人试图透过他让我出席，他会说他自己做决定。你的直接问他。
If somebody tries to rope her into having me show up, she says he makes his own decisions. You gotta ask him directly.
真相，拥抱随机性。
Truth, embracing serendipity.
那反过来呢？你这样不是在扼杀随机性吗？
What about vice versa? Well, you're not killing serendipity in a way, are you?
不，我正在释放所有时间，所以我的整个人生就是随机性。我可以和任何我想互动的人互动，随时随地都行。但我会先听到邀请，再自己做决定。
No, I'm freeing up all my time, so my entire life is serendipity. I get to interact with whoever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want. But I hear the invite, then make the decision.
因为如果事情变少了，你就假设自己最清楚什么对自己最好。
Because if there's fewer things incoming, you're assuming that you know best for you.
我不承诺未来任何事，所以我会说好。如果那件事有趣，我会看当天有没有心情去做。但最糟的是，被过去的自己绑架去做现在的自己根本不想做的事。
I don't commit to anything in the future, so I'll say, okay, if that thing is interesting, I'll see if I can get in that day when I'm in the mood. But there's nothing worse than something coming up that your past self committed you to, that your present self doesn't want to do.
天啊，太正面了。
God damn it. Positive.
是啊，那样会毁掉你整个行程，就像日历上突然冒出一个1小时的分块，让你整天都得围着它打转，会让你前20分钟和后20分钟都什么事也做不了。
Yeah, and then it destroys your entire calendar. It destroys your day because there's like, oh, this 1 hour slot which is sitting like a turd on my calendar that I have to schedule my whole day around. I can't do anything 20 minutes before, 20 minutes afterwards.
即便是打电话，如果有人想要通话，我也会说好，你有空时传我简讯，我有空时再传你，我们临时聊就好。这比过度依赖 Cal.com 或 iCal 的生活方式好多了。
Even for phone calls, if someone wants to do a phone call, say, okay, just text me when you're free, I'll text you when I'm free. We'll just do it on the fly. It's a much better way of living than this overly scheduled cal.com or iCal, whatever.
被过度安排的人生，不值得过吗？
The overscheduled life is not worth living.
没错，我觉得那是种糟糕的活法，那不是我们演化出来的方式，不是我们成长的方式，也不是童年该有的样子。除非你有直升机父母或虎妈，人类的自然状态就是自由。
It's not. I think it's a terrible way to live life. That's not how we evolved. It's not how we grew up. It's not how we were as children, hopefully, unless you have a helicopter parent or a tiger mom. Your natural order is freedom.
我有个朋友曾经说过，我永远不想必须在某个特定的时间出现在某个特定的地方。当我听到这句话时，我心想，天啊，这才是真正的自由。这句话彻底改变了我。
I had a friend who said to me once, you know, I never want to have to be at a specific place at a specific time, and I was like, oh my god, that's freedom. When I heard that, that changed my life right there.
你现在还不用闹钟吗？
You're still alarm clockless?
是的，我不用闹钟。今天唯一一次设闹钟只是为了不错过这次录音。
Yes, I'm alarm clockless. Today, I did set my alarm clock just so I wouldn't miss this.
非常重要，对吧？
Very important, yeah.
但让你知道，我设的是上午11点的闹钟，以防我感冒睡过头。我不会把闹钟设在早上8点或9点。结果果然还是早早就醒了，那只是应急备份而已。事实上，有时候我甚至不想看日历， 只是设个闹钟提醒自己该做什么。
But just so you know, I set the alarm clock for 11 a.m. in case I was stricken with the flu, slept in. I was still not going to set my alarm clock for 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. And sure enough, got up many hours before that. But it was sort of a backup emergency alarm. In fact, sometimes when there's something that I need to do, I don't want to look at a calendar, so I'll just set an alarm for it.
沉浸更多在那种去你的能量里，那种自我优先的能量里，因为我觉得人们理性上都喜欢这个想法。我只做自己想做的事，即便他们已经有相当的自由了。
Just think a little bit more into that, like, that kind of fuck you energy, that self-prioritizing energy. Because I think people rationally love the idea of this. I'm going to do what only I want to do, even if they've got the level of freedom breakers. They seem to lower many kinds of cancer. They almost metabolically reverse aging up to a certain point. And I think they are going to bend the curve on healthcare costs.